He first gained attention as a player, but Pat Riley will always be remembered as one of the NBA's most celebrated coaches.
I mean, stay tough. Stay tough. That's what it's about.
In Los Angeles, he presided over the Showtime era, guiding the Lakers to 4 championships in the 1980s. He continued his success in New York with a tough Knicks team, leading them to the NBA Finals in 1994.
You have to know yourself as well as you know the opponent, and you'll win more battles than you'll lose.
And as coach and team president in Miami, Riley would build the Heat into a powerhouse in the Eastern Conference.
I tried to get players to dig down, as deep as they can dig down into their soul.
This week, it's the story of Pat Riley on Overtime.
In the long run, I'll be able to handle myself man-to-man with almost anyone in the league.
And the Celtics, they have done it again. A spectacular finish.
He was the ABA. He revitalized the NBA.
Presses the inner button in the heart, and all of a sudden he just takes it up.
This man has a smile that lights up a television screen from here to Bangor.
There will never, ever, ever be another Larry Bird.
Michael will take it. He's fouled. He scores. Oh, my Michael with his fifth win.
Shaq the man, most dominant player in the world.
Hello again, everyone. I'm Bruce Beck. Throughout his career, Pat Riley has been a combination of style and substance. His GQ look has always been part of his image. But underneath the tailored suits is a gritty, hard-nosed competitor who's one of the winningest coaches in NBA history, including 4 championships with the Lakers. Today on Overtime, we'll hear from Pat at different times of his career, and we'll begin back in his days as coach of the Lakers in the 1984 season. Look for cameos from Lionel Richie, Michael Douglas, and Jack Nicholson, just some of the stars who were courtside in L.A. during the 80s.
In 3 seasons at the helm, Pat Riley has become one of the most successful coaches in basketball. He has the second highest winning percentage of any coach in NBA history, and a group of athletes that most coaches only have a chance to dream about.
I'll never apologize for having too much talent. Right now, the very best thing that I can do in my life is coaching. It totally preoccupies my mind. I mean, I can sit down and try to read a book, and I can never even get through the first 10 pages because all of a sudden that page is Norm Nixon, or it's Magic Johnson, or it's the Boston Celtics, or it's some thought about the game, and that's disconcerting to me.
There's something else that's disconcerting to Pat. He often feels the glitter of Tinseltown overshadows the ability his players possess. It's constantly having to prove yourself, no matter how many games or championships you win along the way.
When we go on the road, every time we're written about, it's the glitz, the Hollywood effect. Here comes the boys from Sunset Strip. Like there's no substance there. You don't get to the finals throughout the last 4 years and win 2 championships because you dress well only or look good or you have flashy names. It's because you know how to play and you play hard.
Pat's Hollywood good looks and stylish dress have always drawn attention from the media. But it isn't an image that came with the job. It's something that he's been conscious of since his boyhood days in Schenectady, New York.
Even back then, I was a clothes horse. I had 1 pair of pants, a pair of khaki pants that I used to have to wear every day, so I'd wash them every night. And I had to dry them before school, so I used to put them in the oven. But I used to put a towel. I forgot to put a towel on it one day, and I got grill marks on the back of my pants. It was the only pair of pants I had, right? So I ironed those, and I took them to school, wore them to school, and everybody kidded me for about a week that I was trying to cook hamburgers on the back of my pants, So yeah, I like clothes.
While Pat's sense of humor cools the heat from the press, it's the heat of competition that really moves him. He'll take every opportunity to motivate his players, even in a seemingly hopeless situation, such as when the fans walk out during the final moments of a loss.
I mean, it happened against Indiana not too long ago. I mean, they started to leave very early. I had 4 timeouts left. I used every one of them going on out. And they were very squeamish on the bench. They didn't want anything. What are you calling timeouts for? That's what their body language was. I says, you know, if you play like this, I'm going to make you sit here and experience the humiliation of that. Sometimes it's good.
We're down to 7. This is a game.
The details of basketball, the X's and O's, intrigue Riley. He is a serious student of the game, spending hours watching and analyzing game footage. After being swept by Philadelphia in 4 straight during the NBA Finals last season, Riley didn't fault his players, but himself for not properly handling a new and difficult situation.
With all of a sudden experiencing for the first time in my coaching career a team that was just destroyed because of injuries, my dealing with that was to play guys longer, which was wrong. I should have played them long, but short durations. So it was a learned experience, and one that I'll always remember, and you tuck it back there and wait for that to happen again. I hope I don't have to go through it again. I hope it's easy.
No longer a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time, Riley has long since proven his coaching ability. He's seen changes and made changes, and he keeps coming out on top.
I think the team has changed. I know I have changed with it a little bit, but overall we are a group of traveling gypsies that find a way to get the job done and at the same time have a lot of fun.
While Pat continues his jog, it's interesting to note that he used to be quite an athlete. He was a basketball star at Kentucky and was even drafted by the NFL's Dallas Cowboys. Riley played 9 years in the NBA and was part of the Lakers' '72 championship team. But of course, he achieved his greatest fame as a coach, guiding LA in the glory days of Showtime. Up next on Overtime, Pat takes his show from Hollywood to Broadway as he joins the Knicks. In 1990, Pat Riley stepped down as coach of the Lakers. After a year in television, he was back on the sidelines and back in the spotlight, this time as coach of the Knicks. Pat continued his winning ways in New York, but unlike his flashy Laker teams, Riley's Knicks were a physical, blue-collar team, which wasn't all that surprising when you consider that Pat was more of a blue-collar guy than he looked. It was one of the topics in this 1993 interview with Bob Costas.
When I was growing up, I mean, my whole persona was just like what the times were about. I mean, that was about James Dean. It was about Elvis Presley. It was about, I mean, I was normal. But, you know, I'm much older now, and I really am very conscious of what's happened to me. I've never tried to create, ever, an image. I haven't. I never came into the thing. I mean, this is who I am, this is what I present, this is what I started to wear, this is what I started to comb. And I never did it for any other reason as to who I am. And there's a great quote that I like to use by Joseph Campbell. And he said, the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are and what you do. And I think somewhere in your life, we come to terms with that. Recognition and money and position, and power and privilege and all these things that I think a lot of people chase. They chase it. I've been the opposite. I just want to win. I just want to coach. I just want to be part of a significant team. I think those things just sort of follow you. Then you're not affected by them. They're just who you are.
What's the most important part of Schenectady that's still an essential part of you? What remains that's worthwhile from those days as a kid?
It's my taproot. And I think we all have this taproot, you know, that goes way down the ground. And, you know, you make the analogy with that of a Chinese bamboo tree, you know, that you could plant the seed of a Chinese bamboo tree in the ground, and it won't grow at all for 10 years. And then in 1 year, it grow 100 feet. And because it's developing a real root structure. And I think that's what our hometowns and that's what, you know, our backgrounds do for us. And I think the people that I was involved with in Schenectady, New York, when you look back at it now, was the best, was the very best.
How tough a man was your dad?
He was quiet. He was a very quiet, intense man, you know, and I never really got to see him coach much because I was young. By the time I was 4 or 5 years old when he left it and he went into business, and the business was such that that it failed eventually, and he ended up as a custodian at Bishop Gibbons High School. But he was a very dignified man, a man who believed in principles. He had great values, but he was very quiet. And if he ever came and watched me play, he would always watch me from behind the stands, and then he would go home. He wouldn't, he would watch from a distance and make very little comment to me, but he was very aware. Yeah, very strong figure.
I know you have great regard for the profession of coaching and therefore for other coaches. Are you likely to spend time with Bob Knight or John Wooden just to talk coaching? Do those opportunities present themselves?
When they do, I would love to do that. Early in my coaching career, I followed Newell and Knight to their clinics. As a matter of fact, the greatest coaching book that I ever read was recommended to me through a clinic of Bob Knight's, which was The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And
now, is this coincidence or out of deference to you or what? We set up in a hotel suite, not Pat's suite, and here it is, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. What would be the benefit to me, a non-coach, from reading this book?
Know thy enemy. But know yourself so you don't become your own enemy.
How do I know that's not one and the same?
He was one of the great Chinese commanders 2,500 years ago, and probably the thing about it that comes out of it for me is you have to know yourself as well as you know the opponent. And when you know the opponent and know yourself equally, then, and if you're talented, that you'll win more battles than you'll lose.
You hear a lot of players and coaches talk about a place in history. Michael Jordan has talked about that in the pursuit of the three-peat. What do you think history ought to fairly say about you?
I couldn't even fathom making a statement about how that's going to happen. I do think that the teams that I've been around and the fact that I've been part of winners will probably conjure up some thought about what I have done, but other than that, there are a bunch of numbers, and I hope that somewhere born out of all those numbers, some of the things that I taught, to players will be of value.
After 4 years as coach of the Knicks, Pat Riley resigned in 1995 and joined the Miami Heat, where he would not only be the head coach, but also team president. But for Pat, this was his biggest challenge yet. In Miami, there was no Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or Patrick Ewing. The team had never even made it past the first round of the playoffs. But things would change under Riley. Here's a look at Pat as he took over the Heat in '95.
Stay tough. Stay tough. That's what it's about.
The game is over. The Lakers are the world champions. Back to back.
You got to expect quick. Expect quick for New York Knicks. Headed to the NBA Finals to go up against the Houston Rockets.
Pat Riley's teams in Los Angeles and New York each had a different approach to the way they played the game. But the one thing they had in common was great success. Now the question is, what style of play will Riley bring to Miami?
Never had a style that fit in with anybody. If the Lakers were Showtime, they created the style for me. And if the Knicks were hard-working defense, they created the style for me. Everybody thinks I created that for them.
One thing Riley will create for his new team is an atmosphere in which the players will be pushed hard. It's a work ethic no one has any complaints about.
See, what we're not doing is at the end of the set, we're really not playing the game like we played practice.
He's a guy that demands respect, but he gives respect also.
Go about 2 or 3 more hard minutes now. Let's get him out of here, okay?
Brings a winning attitude and atmosphere, and I think if we as a group and as a team start believing like that and believe in ourselves.
I think whatever I bring to the table down here, if there's a level of respect born out of the fact that I've won in 2 other cities, and maybe they feel like I could help them be part of an environment they could win, so be it. But it really is going to be a mutual respect type thing that's going to make this whole thing work.
In all of his 13 seasons as a coach, Riley's teams have made the playoffs. It'll be a challenge to keep that streak alive in Miami, considering that the 6-year-old Heat have finished above 500 only once.
Don't look now, but this game is getting ugly.
I think challenge is what sort of life is all about. I mean, I know I'm going to go through a building process with this team. There may be some aches and pains along the way, but I hope that one day this team will be good enough to have a chance to play for a title.
In the meantime, Riley is excited about the work that lies ahead. And though talk of winning a championship may seem premature, it's all part of the Riley plan.
Probably the greatest challenge that I'll face is to let the players know that this is going to be and can be one of the great experiences of their life. The opportunity to change something, going from a place where they felt that there was mediocrity and there was not any respect to another level. And I think that's the most difficult thing any coach has to do.
Pat built the Heat as both a coach and an executive. He acquired stars like Alonzo Mourning and Tim Hardaway, along with key role players such as P.J. Brown and Dan Marley. And he guided Miami to 4 straight division titles. But Riley also had a share of disappointments. Ironically, his biggest obstacle was a team he left behind, the Knicks, who defeated the Heat 3 straight years in the playoffs. Coming up, a look at Pat, the philosopher, when overtime continues.
You have to understand that there's never any failure. Even though you failed a lot, there's never failure. That the only failure on the part of any individual is their failure to rise again.
With over 1,100 victories, 3 Coach of the Year awards, and 4 NBA titles, Pat Riley is one of the greatest coaches of all time. But it's not just the X's and O's that made Pat successful. It's also his ability to motivate players with his philosophy of winning that he applies to basketball and to life in general. And we'll leave you with some of Pat's reflections in a feature from 2002. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Overtime. For NBA TV, I'm...
The eagle gently coaxes her offspring towards the edge of the nest, and she can feel the resistance to her persistent nudging. Despite her fears, she knows it's time. Her parental mission has all been but complete, and there remains one final task, to push. The eagle knows that unless she pushes, that the eagle will never have a purpose in their lives. It will never experience what it feels like to soar or to fly or to be free. And her greatest gift and the greatest act of love that she can ever have is to finally free them totally and push them off that nest.
The Los Angeles Lakers are the greatest winning team in the history of basketball.
All I knew my whole adolescent and adult life was basketball and being part of teams and getting all of my recognition and identity from the game. The worst thing that ever happened to me was when I was told that I wasn't good enough. You got to hang it up, you ought to quit. And I retired, and I'll never forget the first time that I went back to the Lakers. I remember going back with my wife to a game, and I tried to go up into the family lounge, and they wouldn't allow me into the room. They said that you're not allowed in here anymore because you're not part of the team. And I never forget walking away. It can be rather cruel. It can be like a death, and if you don't handle it right, it can be the undoing of a lot of players. That motivated me. I mean, that motivated me to get back into the game.
I didn't get into this job to be a coach, to become anything else other than...
We're going to win it again.
I tried to get players to dig down, as deep as they can dig down into their soul.
I'm telling you, we're playing, listen, Johnny, get in the game. We're playing a very, very indifferent game. We're indifferent to everything. We're indifferent to picks. We're indifferent to one another. We're holding on to the ball. We're just not playing the game. We're playing around the game again.
I'll push myself, and I will push players and teams to the limit. That's what leadership is about. This one obviously hurts us a hell of a lot more than last year, but life in basketball has a lot of suffering in it, and we will suffer this one. And for 19 years, all I ever knew was winning. I felt that probably I could take 5 guys off the street and win. And this last season with the Miami Heat, it was the first time in 20 years that one of my teams didn't make the playoffs. It was the first time in 20 years that I had a losing record. Through that, I learned more about what it really took to be a coach. You have to understand that there's never any failure. Even though you failed a lot, there's never failure. That the only failure on the part of any individual is their failure to rise again. Down through history, all they ever do is they fall, and they flap, and they fly, and they soar, and they become eagles. And I think from that standpoint, that's what we're all supposed to do. I think it's my job as a coach, my job as a leader, my job as a parent, is that we have to take the risk, and despite the resistance, their resistance to our persistent nudging, it's our responsibility to push people, to push them to a point where they can fly, they become independent. And that's how generations are cultivated. That's how the next leaders take over. And I think you leave a legacy and you leave your footprints in the sand because you've done that somewhere along the way. And I think as a coach, I felt that I have done that.